Welcome to Trends with Benefits, an award-winning podcast by Van Eck with a forward-looking perspective. We explore new ways of thinking about the markets, work, and life. Here's your host, Ed Lopez.
I went home last week to take care of some family stuff, take care of my elderly parents. One was in the hospital, one was sick, so I was there. And I don't know, in my rush to run back to New York for a few days break, I left my laptop at my parents' place. And that's the laptop I use to record and connect my other camera to where I have my home studio. So now I found myself in the Van Eck studio. So part of the experience of taking care of family, if you will, running between cities.
That's right. And I've actually heard that exact thing happen to somebody else.
Is that right?
Yeah. One of the sayings my mom has always had is that stress makes you stupid.
Yeah.
And so when you're really stressed out, you can forget things. And stress, it doesn't even have to feel like stress, but it can be you have a lot going on.
Yeah.
And you're juggling different things that maybe you're not used to juggling. And I think that's one of the issues, or one of the pieces of caregiving is, unless you're a trained caregiver, which even if you are, this is hard. But if you're not a trained caregiver, you're adding one more skill set to your life at a later age than you would normally be adding big skill sets.
Yeah, absolutely. And at least now I have an excuse for my stupidity at times. Now I know where it's coming from. But with that, welcome to another episode of Trends with Benefits. As you may have picked up, we're going to be talking about caregiving today. And as I indicated, this is cutting close to home a bit. What I wanted to do with this episode was explore the challenges, both emotional and financial challenges of those that find themselves in what people call the sandwich generation. People planning for retirement, but also trying to raise a family and also find themselves in a position of caring for loved ones like elderly parents. And so what I hope to do is to chat with my guest, Sarah Ricca. She's a Senior VP and Financial Advisor at Morgan Stanley, and talk through this. Try to understand some of the things that people like myself can do to plan for and implement those plans to be a caregiver, and perhaps cover some of the financial aspects, do's and don'ts, things of that sort that come with caregiving. So with that, I'd like to welcome Sarah. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Ed. Thanks. I'm thrilled to be here.
The situation I described, and we talked a little bit about it right before we did the intro, but are you finding more and more demand for people planning for caregiving in your practice?
Yes, it's an issue across the board. I just actually got off another client conversation, and one of the things, they have their mothers living with them. She's really helpful with the childcare right now, but at some point they need to plan for what does her long-term care look like. And it's just a piece of life for so many people as we have an aging population, and then people have children, and they really are sandwiched between caring for two different generations at the same time, potentially.
In your experience, what have you seen in terms of demographics of caregivers? Who does it traditionally fall to?
Yeah, 61% of caregivers are women. So that is, but that's 39% are men, right? So, and I think that that's falling to people in that sort of 40s, 50s, 60s, and it can even be 70s, right? It depends on the age of the person they're caring for. And you have sort of two sides of it. One can be parents who are growing older. It can also be adult children coming home for different reasons. It really sort of runs the gamut in terms of who it falls upon, but 61% of the folks are women that are handling that right now. In
your role as a financial advisor, when do people tend to come to you, and how does it come up in a discussion with a client?
Like I said, I was just talking to a client earlier, and you kind of get a sense for what they have going on personally and what their goals are. Some people, it's very overt. My goal is to take care of my parents. In other cases, we may say to someone, is there anybody you think you're going to have to care for long term? And they may say, well, I have a special needs child, or I have a child that is going to be needing financial assistance. Or they will say, you know what, there's probably a good chance that I'm going to need to either help out my parents financially or physically, in the actual caregiving. And so we try to make a plan around that.
Where do people start when starting to plan for caregiving? What do you think are some of the key considerations and things that they need to think about?
I think part of it is, well, there's two big things, right? Time and money. So how much time is it going to take, and how's that going to look? And for some people, that's really, really tricky, because if you're taking care of kids and you're taking care of your parents and you have a job, what happens? And what we see from that is there are a number of people who they can't work the same that they were, or they're not saving the same as they were, because there's either a time or a financial impact. And I think that thinking through and planning some of that out can be really helpful. There's two pieces of that too, though. Sometimes caregiving lands in your lap suddenly, and sometimes you kind of know, okay, my parents are 85. At some point, this could be a thing. And the other piece of that is the conversations. It's not always easy to have a conversation, especially with an 85-year-old parent who's super active, to say, you know what, I think having 3 sets of stairs in your house might be an issue one day. They don't always want to hear that. Kind of having that conversation and open communication is the first step. And whether that's with us as financial advisors or directly with their parents and the people they're caring for. I'll give you another example, actually. I have a client who has a grown son, and they've been financially assisting the son, and there's some mental health situation there, and it's impacting their retirement. The mom's going to have to work longer because there's a financial need for the child. And so we had a conversation about this to say, what's the plan? And we came up with having a conversation to say, how do we work together on this? And what do we need to do, because this is impacting my retirement? And sort of having that open communication, but having some collaboration with that, so no one's made to feel bad, but also figuring out how do we work on this together so that we can both accomplish our goals.
When you talk about things like estate planning and wills and trusts, as a middle-class kid, I think that's really for rich people. And do you have to be a high net worth person to put these documents in place and keep them up to date?
No. And if you don't have any documents in place and you pass away, that means that whoever is the next of kin has to deal with being the executor of, they have to get appointed as the executor, they have to deal with being the executor, depending on the state that you live in. And the real thing that I would ask any parent is, how much effort do you want your kid to have to go through for this? One of the pieces of that is titling, right? So as a financial advisor, we title things appropriately. And if accounts aren't titled right, that matters when you pass away, right? So are your beneficiaries who you want them to be on your IRA? Should an account be titled in joint name, or should it be titled transfer on death? There are ways where you can use even titling to assist with that estate planning piece. But you don't need a lot of money to do that. And so even if you just have basic bank accounts or a car or a house, the titling on those assets matters if and when you pass. When?
Right, when. And so what are some of the key documents? So we've highlighted a couple of them, but what are some of the key documents in the caregiving playbook, if you will?
Having your will or your trust, depending, and that can depend on the level of the assets, but also on the ease of processing an estate, right? So you could have a trust. You don't have to have a lot of assets to have things named in a trust, even though it seems like a big, fancy, wealthy person thing. People who have a lot of money do often have trusts, but people who don't have a lot of money have trusts too, because it facilitates any probate process when someone passes. So you want to have the will or the trust. You want to have your power of attorney. So if something happens to me, as an example, my husband has financial power over the assets while I'm still alive. Power of attorney doesn't help you when you pass, but while you're alive, it does. A healthcare proxy that says that somebody can make health decisions for me, and then a living will, which is the idea that if I'm completely incapacitated and maybe I don't want to be on life support, having that choice, right? So those are sort of the core 4 that most attorneys will prepare for a client. But depending on your individual situation, those documents can vary, and you'd talk to an attorney about that.
In your experience working with clients, as they start to go through this and start to, let's say they have their documents in place, when do they know is the right time to start to really, not really enforce that document, but start to rely on that document and say to their parents or whomever, okay, maybe it's time for me to just take over the finances, or let me take care of this for you now, or whatever it is. Let me start to go to doctor's appointments with you.
Yeah, that varies. Sometimes you see people where the parent is like, okay, it's time, right? The parent says something. And other times the kid's trying to get in there and the parent's saying no. And in those cases, there is only so much one can do, I think. At some point, it gets decided for you. And, the line about, you can work with me now to get this decided how you want, or at some point I'm going to be making these decisions for you the way I think they're going to make, because you haven't told me what you want me to do. I mean, that's not the most friendly way to say it, but that's true, right? So you can either kind of collaborate together up front, or at some point things are just going to start happening. The other thing too that I've had clients do is, talk to the doctor, go with, one doctor's appointment, or say, have you asked the doctor about such and so? I think this is a strange side note, but hearing aids seem to be an area that some people are like, I want my hearing aids and I want to go get a hearing aid. And some people sort of fight that. And that's an example, or even driving, where you may ask for the opinion of a physician to kind of help with that conversation a little bit.
And maybe I know it varies from family to family, but in your experience, are more people staying at home, or they go into care facilities? Maybe it's based on the need, but I would think that everybody wants to stay at home if they can. I don't know. Have you seen any trends in that regard?
Yeah, a lot of people say they want to stay home. My opinion on this is that you have to think about the needs of the parent. So if they have a house with 3 flights of stairs and, and you can't get in the house without getting over stairs, and they want to be by themselves, and there's no way to get a walker around things because the house isn't ADA compliant, there's a safety issue, right? Like just a basic safety issue, which I think that I can't say enough. And what happens as a caregiver, you're worried. So now you're worried, right? Like either you're there all the time and you're watching someone, or you have to have somebody there all the time, or you're worried someone's going to fall down the stairs, slip in the tub. And so just kind of thinking through all of those things and being practical about it, that can be hard for people. And there are a lot of options, right? So there's so many different choices. So you can have home care, which it's expensive. And to my point on safety, that doesn't always mean that everything's going to be, roses and sunshine. You can have a assisted living retirement community. There's these things called a continuing care retirement community, which is where you buy in when you're healthy and independent, but it has assisted living and nursing care all on the same sort of facility. And one of the reasons those are so nice and attractive for people is that there's community. So if I live there and I make my friends while I'm independent and I'm going to see shows on Broadway and doing all that stuff, and then something happens and I slip and fall and I break my ankle, my friend can come see me because they live right there too. And I think that's a nice option for a lot of people. And then there's different kinds of, there's independent living, there's assisted living, and there's nursing care, and then there's memory care. And just going around and sort of shopping those around and getting a vibe and talking to people there. And there's a lot of different price points too. You have to save up for any of this. If you, let's say as the child, are taking care of the parent, that's a lot of time and a lot of energy. And even my clients where they're a nurse or a doctor and they're doing that, it's a lot because it's different when it's your parent.
Definitely. And you talked about like different price points for some of these options. Have you seen different strategies for tackling that? As the child or the potential caregiver, I'm almost willing to just throw money at it and help them and help alleviate their suffering or whatever. But are there other resources that one should look to, whether it's your parents' long-term care policies or, tapping the equity in their house to pay for things? I don't know. Have you seen other strategies that can help caregivers out?
Yeah. I mean, it depends on the child's financial situation a lot of times, right? So I think, first of all, if somebody has a long-term care policy, which basically means if I have a policy on myself, if I have either a dementia diagnosis or I can't handle 2 out of 6 of my activities of daily living, feeding yourself, bathing yourself, that kind of stuff, then the policy kicks in and that can provide financial support. And I think if somebody has a long-term care policy or they get one now for the future, I think that's a no-brainer, right? Take the funds from there first. And then you have to look at sort of the parents' assets, and that may be their assets, right? They may be receiving income from Social Security or pension, as well as their assets. And then you can also look to I think you're sort of getting to the reverse mortgage idea. And that's a bigger conversation that you really want to have with a professional. And then you can throw money at that problem. I mean, that is a thing. And we have seen, depending on care, it can be $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 a month for sort of a retirement / a little bit of assisted living to I've seen $100,000 a month. And that's hardcore. I mean, that's where you have sort of, on staff 24/7 RNs kind of idea. When faced with the choice, if you have the financial resources, many people say, yeah, that's how you, what for, right? Why did I save all this money if I'm not going to use it for the home care so I can live however long I'm going to live the way I want? But yeah, it runs the gamut.
And part of this process of looking for service providers or home care providers or what have you, I find daunting at times and takes a lot of effort. Do you have other services that you tap as a financial advisor or relationships that help people through that and navigate their local markets?
Yeah, I mean, so the geriatric care manager, we have somebody and we give her name to clients all the time. And many people don't know that that's a job that exists to be able to help and to talk about throwing money at that problem. That's to me like the easiest money to throw at a problem, right? If that's an option, because they've done this before and they like doing it. So they know here are the things to think about. The other thing that they do is they facilitate those awkward conversations about like taking away the keys. Typical example is my parent falls down, they end up in the hospital, now they're in rehab, now they're coming home. What are we going to do, right? That's where you get the geriatric care manager who sits down with the kids to say, what do we want? And sits down with the kids and the parent potentially to say, okay, how are we going to figure this out? Because the way that we've been doing things before isn't going to work anymore. So we got to make the changes. And when you bring in a third party that's not the kid, that can often facilitate that conversation. So that's one resource is state attorney, therapist, right? There's a lot of mental health component to being a caregiver and self-care and thinking through that. That's really important for people to take care of themselves because it's a huge amount of physical and emotional energy that goes into this.
Yeah. One of the difficulties that I've had with that is there's a period of time where the parent is having a hard time and they'll fall down, but then I'll show up and then they start to get healthier and they feel better and they're walking around okay and they seem stronger. I'm like, okay, maybe you don't need regular check-ins or from a healthcare provider. But interviewing one person and she was talking to long-term care insurance providers. And when you call them, think about your worst day, like the day you fell down, and don't think about like how you feel right now in terms of talking to the ADLs, the activities of daily living. And I thought that kind of made sense to me. It's like there was a time, and there's been more than one time where a parent has fallen and couldn't get up. And while they've been okay for the last few months, I don't know, maybe it's really time to start thinking about it and having somebody come in on a more regular basis.
Yeah. And you can have that person. I'll give an example. I had someone and they just were like, we don't think there's laundry happening there. So we're going to have somebody come do your laundry. And she also is going to take you on a few errands and kind of like assess the situation. Because if I'm the kid, every time I go over, mom says she's fine, right? But now we're just going to call in for backup. And the backup can look all different ways for people.
Before, I think you talked about how caregiving falls largely to women, or has traditionally. And as I think about the state that we're in now, I know we have a lot of work to do. More and more women find themselves in executive positions. Are you finding that there's a tension there that these executive level women are now facing also because they want to take care of their parents or their families, and gosh, they don't want to give up what they've worked so hard for? Are you seeing some of that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that goes with, parents, kids, pets, anything, right? There's if it's falling more on women and women are in that senior role, there's a balancing act there that's potentially unpleasant. And depending on resources, to your point on throw money at that problem, that can help. But people want people, right? They don't want a stranger to show up, and the stranger who's showing up may not understand, where the medicine is and how it works, and they got to make a phone call. And so I think this goes for an executive situation or even just a family situation. Expectations, clear communication. So if you need to have clear communication with your team at work, or clear communication with your siblings, or clear communication with your parents, and kind of mapping that out a little bit can be helpful. And figuring out contingency plans. If I'm spending a lot of time because have a parent going through a health situation and I need somebody at work to help me out and back me up a little bit here and there because of that, I mean, that's something you can sort of plan around. Just like I might need my sibling to step in, or is there somebody else that I can tag team in certain situations to be able to address whatever the issues are.
How can a financial advisor help with the caregiving planning and implementation for a client?
So we're strong in the financial planning piece of it, right? So the money side of things, figuring out how much is needed, what's it going to be needed for, that would be something that would fall into our area of expertise or our skill set. And also having the conversations, like even this conversation right now, getting people to think about things a little differently because we have experience working with a lot of families can be really helpful. It's helpful to know, I mean, one of our sayings in the office is everything's better with a buddy. It's helpful to know that other people have gone through this. And for some reason, when it comes to caregiving or a parent being ill, it feels like it's like the first time for everything. And every situation is so unique. And that is true. But there are other people who've gone through it. And people sort of kind of talk about this stuff. But every situation is different because some parents, like your mom, are organized and set up and they can handle the hard conversation and other parents can't. And so how do I handle that? And so our perspective in working with many clients is that we hear different things and we can provide some of that information to our clients above and beyond what would come in terms of a financial plan component of that.
And how can financial advisors, if they're not already engaged with care provider services, get involved and help bolster their own practice?
Yeah, I mean, that geriatric care manager person, find a good one in your geography that can be helpful, and that good one can help you when your client's parent lives in Denver, because you call up your person in New Jersey and you say, do you know anybody good in Denver? And they'll either know somebody good in Denver or they'll know go to this association and this is where you look to get somebody with a level of expertise in Denver. The same idea with attorneys. So having an attorney that specializes in elder care and understands elder care, and there's a very specific, not an attorney, but there's a specific designation that certain attorneys get to be an elder care expert. And so you want to find those people and you want to have them as a resource. And the nice thing about geriatric care managers and trust and estate attorneys is they collaborate easily. So if I say to a trust and estate attorney in New York, do you have anybody in Florida? They'll have a name for me. And that makes a big difference. And so kind of getting a little bit of a network along those lines can be really helpful. The other thing too, in terms of resources, is that checklist. What are all the documents you need to have? How does somebody get organized? At Morgan Stanley, we have a multitude of documents, information, templates, checklists that we can provide to clients. And I'm sure other firms do too. And so having access to that can be really helpful. And then the last thing I would say is, as a financial advisor, thinking through this stuff for all the generations of your clients and, collaborating with their attorneys to make sure things are titled right, double checking beneficiaries, kind of staying on top of that can make a huge difference to your clients.
Well, this has been great. One question I asked my guests towards the end of the episode is their broader perspective on markets and whatever they're thinking about. It could be about this particular topic, but the broad question is, what's one long-term trend you see playing out over the next several years?
I think, so first of all, I think caregiving is a trend that's going to definitely be playing out as we have 10,000 people a day turning 65 or whatever that number is. I don't think this is an area that's going away, but as part of a bigger picture, it's about goals-based planning, right? So what is the client's goal and how do you provide true holistic wealth management to someone beyond just investment management? Investment management is super important to everyone's financial plan, but everybody's goals are different. And if you're not taking into consideration what are the goals and how do the investments align with that, and putting together all of the pieces that are important to someone's life, I think that's the biggest component of our job and really helping people. As financial advisors, we have moved from investment managers to wealth managers, and wealth isn't just money.
This is a kind of a random question, but do you think there are companies that stand to benefit from an investment standpoint from that trend?
I think that those companies providing holistic wealth management and advisory services are in a different position than companies that are just providing investment management. I mean, our team, we have 2 family wealth directors, which is an internal designation at Morgan Stanley that is for sophisticated planning, 3 certified financial planners, a certified portfolio manager, an accredited domestic partnership advisor, a certified divorce financial analyst. Like, the reason we have all that alphabet soup is because this stuff is complicated and people's lives are complicated, and you have to have different specialties to address different needs. And so you can't just go to one person to get the answers to all those questions. You need a team of people and a team of resources. And the bigger firms are going to have more available resources, bigger teams to be able to work with their clients.
So the last little bit of our episode is a segment called Trend or Fad. I'm going to mention 3 to 5 different topics, and you can simply answer trend or fad. First one is alternative investment platforms for art, wine, real estate, etc. Trend or fad?
Trend.
Layoffs, trend or fad?
Hopefully a fad.
Inflation protection, trend or fad?
Trend.
Renewables like EV, solar, battery storage.
Trend.
And finally, cruise ship retirements, trend or fad?
I think a trend.
That's interesting, right?
This is an area that I very much enjoy talking to people about because I have a couple people thinking about it. It's not cheap, but your medical's included. And it's a great way to see the world in a floating hotel.
What do they go for? Like 300,000 for a year or something? I'm sure there's a range.
Yeah, you can, it varies. It depends on the ship.
Yeah.
But your medical is included. And so I'll just give you a hypothetical. I retire at 62. I pay my COBRA for 18 months. So now I'm 63 and a half and I don't get Medicare until I'm 65. Hop on a ship for 18 months. My medical's included. I was spending 25 grand a month anyway in my life, but I've sold everything. I get to see the world. It's not a crazy idea.
Not a bad idea. Well, this is awesome. Sarah, thank you so much for joining me on the episode today.
Thank you so much. It's been very fun. Such a pleasure.
And before we leave, what's the best way for people to find you, learn more about what you're doing, connect with you?
You can Google Sarah Ricca at Morgan Stanley. You can email sarah.ricca@morganstanley.com. Happy to talk to anybody who wants to reach out.
Fantastic. Check it out. All right. Thank you. And thank you for tuning in to another episode of Trends with Benefits.